Hello, I'm Michael Garvey, the chairman of Buckinghamshire Business First, and I'm delighted to be joined by Toddington Harper, who is the CEO of Gridserve based in Ivor, who's doing some fantastic work in the area of sustainable energy, charging points for EV. But I'm going to let Toddington introduce himself in a moment. We're going to have a wide-ranging conversation about the current climate crisis, what Toddington's business is doing to assist with that. Hopefully we'll dispel some myths about EV charging, about the availability of charging points on the network, because Toddington and Gridserve have been doing some amazing things on the motorway and hubs across the country. And I think as we transition into a world of sustainable energy, what's most important at the moment is about dispelling some of the myths, giving confidence to people to drive EVs, and really starting to get people thinking more carefully about climate change, the impact obviously upon the world around us, and to think carefully about some of the technologies that are coming through to make a real difference. So that's enough from about the situation from me at the moment. So Toddington, good afternoon, welcome. We met each other recently at an event at your offices in Ivor, where Joy Morrissey was hosting an MP briefing session. And I was fascinated to hear about the work that you're doing. But why don't you tell our listeners a bit more about Gridserve and your passion?
Yeah, so Michael, great to meet you again, and thanks for having me on the podcast. So my name is Toddington Harper. I've been building sustainable energy businesses for over 20 years now. I kind of, I'm one of the few people that's kind of like a next generation sustainable energy person, because my parents were actually building solar energy and battery projects 45 years ago, and I'm not 45, so that's kind of where I came from. And I'm really focused on trying to, I guess, use this opportunity that we have at this very precious moment in time to really make a difference. I developed and built Gridserve, and we're really doing our bit to deliver sustainable energy solutions, particularly around power and transport, at the scale and within the timeframes available to really move the needle on climate change and make a difference.
So in terms of sustainable energy, I mean, I've got a good idea what that means, but just for clarity, let's hear from you about sustainable energy and what that really means.
So, what it really means, and I guess I'll put that in the context of the IPCC, which is the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is the world's top body of scientists at the United Nations, who for the last 30 years have been looking at the climate science and monitoring what's happening in weather patterns, and looking at increasingly, horrific, weather changes, and identifying and correlating that to, the amount of carbon dioxide that's released when we burn fossil fuels. And unfortunately, they had to come together at the beginning of this year, in March this year, and create something called the synthesis report that basically said this is the last chance. We're already at 1.1 degrees of warming. And to, I guess, remind people what that's like, we saw more than 40 degrees temperature in the UK last year, which is unprecedented. At the same time, around the world, we had the biggest floods imaginable in places like Pakistan, where 33 million people were out of their homes due to flooding. There were extreme weather events, hurricanes, tornadoes, wildfires, and all sorts of stuff. And that's 1.1 degrees of warming. And so what the world's leading scientists have said is that, look, it's bad, but it's going to get much, much worse when we go beyond 1.5 degrees of warming, let alone 2 or above. And we're going to get there very, very quickly. And in fact, the only way not to get there is if we radically transform what we're doing. We stop producing carbon emissions, we stop emitting them into the atmosphere. And we do it, pretty much immediately. And we effectively have around 10 years to make a difference. And when you look at it like that, and we're currently, just to give you more perspective, on track to wildly overshoot it, overshoot 2 degrees of warming. And at 2 degrees of warming, as an example, 99% of all the world's coral reefs cannot survive. And so when you look at it in that kind of broad context, it's not something that we often focus on as a species, because it's just too big, isn't it? It's too much to kind of get your head around. The other two bigger topic is that in the last 50 years, the World Wildlife Fund for Nature has done its study and said that 70% of the world's wildlife has been wiped out. So kind of like on our watch. At the time I've been living, we presided over horrific climate events and the destruction of species. And but the good news is that there is an opportunity. There is an opportunity to mitigate it. There is an opportunity to kind of give back to nature. And it's on our watch, but we have a very short window of time, and that's what I call moving the needle, because you can't just continue with business as usual, because business as usual will lead to more of what we've already had before. So we really need to do something different. We need to do it very quickly, and we need to align what we're doing with the science of the world's leading scientists.
Okay, so there's some big themes in there, aren't there? And obviously, there's some dramatic changes happening around the globe all of the time at the moment, and as you've highlighted, the impact is getting greater and greater. But there is a resistance naturally, I think, isn't there, to really think, well, what can I do? And I think people sometimes feel a little bit sort of helpless, and maybe we'll come back to what people can do to make a difference. But clearly, one of the things they can do, and there are so many sort of cars in the world. So many sort of petrol and diesel cars contributing to sort of climate change significantly. That the whole world of electric vehicles has changed the landscape a little bit, but there is a bit of a resistance to take that up. I think there's a lot of misunderstanding around the charging network. And the impact that driving that EV can have positively to climate change. So how long have you, as an organization, because I know effectively you're taking sustainable power into a grid, into a network, and then obviously encouraging people to drive electric vehicles. So maybe let's start with that energy production. So I know you're big into solar farms. And in a county like Buckinghamshire, we've seen quite a lot of solar farm planning applications, quite a lot of development activity. Just tell us a bit about solar farms and dispel some of the myths there, perhaps.
So I definitely will. And just to come back on one of the themes that you mentioned in the build up to that, is that people often feel powerless because these are just quite big topics. But if everybody thought there's nothing I can do, then we wouldn't be able to achieve it. And the important thing is there is something that everybody can do, and we all need to do it, because we're all living and ultimately, want to look after the planet for our, ourselves, our future generations, and beyond. So we're really trying to help that. The bit that we're enabling or helping people to make the transition to is electric vehicles. We're doing that by putting in charging infrastructure across the depth and breadth of the country incredibly quickly. That's very, very reliable. So people have the confidence to transition to any type of electric car. But as you highlighted, it's not just about being able to charge vehicles. It's about where's that energy going to come in the first place. So we kind of look at again, we take quite a macro view that we kind of think of a solar farm as a modern equivalent of an oil well. People don't really think about it. When you ask somebody, you say, where does the energy in oil and gas come from? And a lot of the time people don't really think about it, because you think, well, it comes from the ground. But how did it get in the ground? Well, it was plants and animals and probably bits of dinosaurs from hundreds of millions of years ago. But where did they get it from? And when you start peeling it back, originally the energy was harvested by plants and algae through photosynthesis from the sun. So all of the energy in oil and gas comes from the sun. It's just hundreds of millions of year-old sunlight, which then needs to be refined, processed, transported from generally fairly far away places, and ultimately then taken to combustion engine vehicles where it's burned. And so what we're doing is we're building a net zero equivalent of that. So instead of the oil wells using old sunlight, we are building new solar farms to generate today's sunlight. And actually, people, again, it's just remarkable because we've done a lot of this, but for every acre of land that we can put solar projects on in the UK, we can generate enough energy every year to drive 1 million miles in electric cars. Isn't that amazing? 1 million miles in electric cars. And so I'm delighted that there's some great activity in Buckinghamshire, because there's a lot of miles driven in Buckinghamshire, and there's certainly, there's certainly is a great opportunity to produce a lot of that energy securely. The other thing, just briefly, I guess, talking about solar, I talked about biodiversity, uh, destruction effectively, and how quickly we're losing, wildlife. And what we do when we build solar farms is we don't just generate energy for driving electric vehicles, but we also use that land to benefit nature. So we actually turn solar projects into nature sanctuaries to protect species, and really give them a home. So there's wonderful things that you can do with solar projects, about generating clean energy for our modern transport and energy needs that's secure. 1 million miles for every acre every year, but also giving back to nature in the process. And then what we do is we take that sun energy. It kind of needs to be refined because it's not always sunny. Sometimes it's at night, for example, every day, or sunnier in the summer and the winter, and so on and so forth. So we use batteries in the middle to kind of refine that energy, make it more useful as to when you need it. Some projects we can put the energy directly into cars. Sometimes we'll have to put it into the grid in one location and net it off against kilowatt hours we take out in the grid in other locations. So it's either a zero or a net zero approach. We're then building electric hubs at most of the motorway sites. So we've upgraded 85% of chargers on the motorway network in the last couple of years. People probably don't realize that, but we actually did 130-ish locations in 130 days. It was 130 locations in 130 days, which is quite remarkable. And now what we're doing is we are upgrading them further with 6 to 12 really high power chargers. So chargers that are capable of providing 100 miles of charge in only 5 minutes just across the motorway network. And cars today won't accept that level of power. The batteries won't accept it, but that means they're future-proofed, to be able to do that in the future. And they're probably only 2 or 3 years away. And I guess to complete the jigsaw, we are also building electric forecourts, which is like your modern equivalent of a petrol forecourt to serve your location. We'd love to put some of these in Buckinghamshire. The last piece of the jigsaw is to give people the confidence to transition. We're also helping to lease electric cars so people can go and do test drives, and they can try different types of vehicles without any obligation or costs or so on. Because when somebody gets behind an electric car, then they start thinking, this is pretty cool. And then when they have the confidence that they can go and charge, which you obviously can with our network, then it should really give people the confidence to make the transition and to do it straight away.
Brilliant. Okay, so there's a lot of information there. So I'm going to unpack some of those sort of themes that you've spoken about. So with solar farms, for example, I think the technology has changed significantly, and obviously solar panels have been around for a very long time. We're used to seeing them in a domestic setting. Obviously, the solar farms are huge in terms of acreage and their ability. And I was interested to hear you're sort of cutting out the middleman, really, aren't you? That sort of those millions of years of compressed dinosaurs and vegetation to produce oil and gas. You're cutting that whole process out by literally taking the sun onto a solar panel. So in terms of technology, it's interesting. So I'm looking out my window at the moment, and although it's just clouded over, the sun was out a short while ago. Is it a complete misnomer that you need the sun to be shining for these things to work most efficiently? What's the relationship between sort of sunshine and effectiveness of a modern solar panel?
Yeah, so I mean, it's pretty obvious that it definitely helps. The sunnier it is, the more energy that's going to be produced. But perhaps what people don't realize is that the solar panels operate off daylight, not just sunlight. So you'll generate energy every day. It's just you'll generate more on sunnier days. We work a lot with solar energy because it's just so straightforward, such a reliable technology. And it's just getting better and better all the time. But it's not the single solution. Wind power is also really a really important part of the solution. And there's a great relationship between solar and wind as well, is that, when it's very sunny, it tends to not be as windy, and vice versa. And so the two work really well. Similarly, you get more sun in the summer and more wind in the winter. So there's, again, a good fix there. The other great thing about solar is that, if you're lucky enough to have solar, or to be able to put solar on your rooftop, then you can, very easily, with a kind of standard size solution that people are deploying, generate around 10,000 miles of EV charging just from your rooftop every single year. And like that's just awesome. A roof which is already receiving that sunshine, it's just going onto a tile and not much else. That same roof space can make 10 million, or sorry, 10,000 miles a year, and that really is cutting out the middleman. You are
Yeah, and I
absolutely
think
harvesting that energy and putting it directly into your
no,
house.
exactly, and I think you mentioned about sort of storing surplus energy within batteries. I think sort of battery technology has improved significantly in recent years, hasn't it? Because I think that's been one of the big technology challenges is how do you sort of store that surplus energy that's produced from solar panels, for example. So within a domestic setting, is it now possible for a household to be self-sufficient with effectively enough on-demand solar, but then when, as you say, weather conditions aren't with you, perhaps the ability to store and then release that when you need it?
Yeah, I mean that's exactly what I do at my home. I've got a reasonably large solar array. I've got solar panels pointed on at different angles to the sun. So in the east, it's kind of, I catch the morning through, then I have the south, and then the west in the afternoon. That's really good because that kind of balances generation throughout the day. I have a battery on top of that, which can then further provide more balancing as to when it's needed. I don't have any boiler. I put a heat pump in when I recently upgraded my home, and so that's really amazing because every unit of sunshine converts to about 5 units of heat, which is just amazing. And we've got 2 electric cars, so and over the course of all of that, we've got quite a lot of energy use in the house. But like probably 60-70% of my energy is generated from solar, which is
Yeah,
great. And if I
yeah.
really optimize, and I'm working on optimizing all these different bits and pieces, then I could probably get that as high as 80% or more.
Yeah, and of course, energy security is becoming an increasing factor. We've all had to live with much higher energy bills recently, which I think has brought into sharp focus, an over-reliance upon, fossil fuels. And I guess therefore, from a sort of climate emergency, doing the right sort of thing, but also a sort of, pound in your pocket approach, I think more people will start to look at alternative means of power. But how readily is it available to the sort of normal household? It's interesting. So lots of new houses being built all over the place at the moment. And I don't think it's a planning requirement, unless you tell me otherwise, for there to be solar panels and batteries and that sort of sustainability. So how do we start to embed that thinking in some of the planning system, for example, is a good place to start. What do you think about the idea of every new house having solar panels, having a degree of sustainability?
Yeah, I mean, it's not something that I really focus on. What I tend to focus on is the larger scale end of it. So I'm not fully up to date with all of the laws. I know there are certain requirements for energy efficiency measures and and hopefully renewable energy too. But it definitely should happen, as you say, for for economic benefits as well. Homes are increasingly energy performance certificates are
Yeah,
increasingly viable, important part of the value of your home. So if you want to have a valuable home, then you want to make it as efficient as possible because it's a less expensive home to run. That there is there is an incredible opportunity to in generating your own energy to
yeah,
be kind of not reliant on the grid. And energy security wasn't really a thing until, well, we just never thought so much until a couple of years ago, and then all of a
no,
sudden it was like, wait a second. And the fact that I can generate as much energy as I need for my 2 cars from my house, in fact a lot more, um never having to use, you know, a petrol station is just, it's very, you know, it's very it feels very freeing. You know, I'm not incumbent to the
Yeah.
infrastructure, and then equally there's people like me building much bigger versions of the same
Yeah.
across the country, so we can build, you know, directly connected solar farms with quite big batteries that connect to public charging infrastructure. So equally, if there's, you know, if there's an oil crisis or there's something horrendous that goes on in some part of the world, people wouldn't need to panic. You know, worst case, wait for some afternoon sunshine, and you'll
Well,
be
no,
all right.
exactly. Yeah, no, absolutely.
So
And
the
it's
energy
interesting.
security benefits, but also with that came the cost. And you know,
Yeah.
I don't think anybody expected the price of energy to increase so much. And obviously, the price of the, you know, sunlight energy didn't. In fact, solar energy is, you know, getting cheaper and cheaper. So there's, you know, financially, it's really attractive, particularly if you use it in electric cars. You know, it's a secure way of doing things. It feels great, and you're obviously doing something great for the planet as well.
Yeah, and I think actually, I guess as the cost of conventional, let's call it traditional energy increases, and I think it's hard to see that ever going down substantially. It doesn't tend to happen like that, does it? And I think as the cost of sustainable energy reduces, aligned with a change in attitudes, I think we, you know, there is a significant movement now in favour of this. So let's just think about electric vehicles for a moment. So I'm a two EV household as well, but perhaps
Fantastic.
disappointingly, I also keep a diesel car, which is not so good.
Do you use it? Do you ever use it?
Well, yeah, from time to time, but on longer journeys. And so actually, I'm a living example of somebody that got um, sort of concerned a couple of years ago about the lack of charging facilities on the motorway,
Yeah.
the unreliability of some of those services. And I have to say, to my shame, you know, if we're going a long journey now, we tend to use the diesel car. But I was speaking to some of your colleagues about your rollout on the motorway network, which has sort of passed me by a little bit. I was used to a couple of years ago turning up at a service station. There might be, you know, one charging point for non-Tesla car owners with two nozzles for the different types of charging connectors. And often, you know, they wouldn't be working. Somebody would be on it. And again, we spoke, didn't we, about the protocol of queuing for charging points. When you go to a petrol station, the queue is obvious. If you go to a motorway service station, perhaps it's less obvious. But a lot has changed. So maybe tell our listeners a little bit more about the very significant work you've been doing on the motorway network. And now, you know, what does a Gridserve charging point look like on a motorway services?
Yeah, so I mentioned on the, you know, briefly earlier that we took over a network which is the oldest network in the UK from Ecotricity. He kind of passed us the baton for the next phase. We mobilized a lot of funding. We just went like the clappers to upgrade all of the existing chargers, the ones that you talked about. You know, typically one or two per location. And our plan, you know, first part of it was let's just replace all of those with really new chargers. That was never going to solve the problem. It was just going to, you know, make the process more straightforward, because we went from a lot of old chargers that, you know, in their heyday were the best thing out there, but you know, 10 years later were pretty unreliable, and the tech was very old and didn't deliver the customer experience. To suddenly they all work. There just weren't enough of them. And then the next phase is how do we get a lot more? And to get a lot more, we've also been investing in new grid connections. And that takes a lot longer because you've got to connect to the, you know, the medium voltage or high voltage power cables. You've got to negotiate all sorts of, you know, access routes for the cables and all sorts of stuff. But the good news is we've been doing that for quite a while now. And these sites are really coming on stream. So we've got around 20 of these new sites live. We call them electric super hubs. So we leave the new chargers in that we already replaced, and then alongside them we put in a minimum of 6, but it could be 12, it could be 18, it could be 24 really high power chargers, as I mentioned, up to 350 kilowatts of power. And that just takes away the anxiety, you know. And even if there is a queue, you're not going to queue for very long. And really, we are focused on delivering as many of these as possible, as quickly as possible. You know, dozens and dozens and dozens of these new electric super hub sites this year alone. We've got a great partnership with Moto, and Road Chef in particular, where we're really focused on upgrading these locations, and we're just going for it to really get there as quickly as we possibly can, and that will give you the confidence. So next time you're going on a long journey, Michael, do let me know. Do let me know. And I'd really love to give you the confidence. Say, you know what, I can leave that diesel at home. It's going to be okay. As an example, you might want to have a look at like Reading Services, for example, or Heston. Heston Eastbound, or some of these types of sites that we've upgraded recently, where you can turn up in any type of electric car. You don't need to be affiliated to any network. You just turn up, you plug in, you pull out your contactless card, you touch it to the device, it starts charging. It will charge as quickly as your car will allow it to, and you go and have a cup of coffee. And it should be fine.
So these charge now are literally sort of plug and pay, because it used to be that you had to sign up for some sort of thing and make a prepayment, and I did this a couple of times a couple of years ago, and it was just so painful. You weren't quite sure if you had paid, and there's been some horror stories, but actually you're giving me that confidence that I and other drivers need. I think that literally you can turn up, that there's minimum number of these, they're fast. You can simply just sort of pay as you go, and as you say, go and enjoy a coffee, and a relatively quick coffee by the sounds of things.
Yeah, and the thing is that I've been an electric vehicle driver since 2014, and so what's that? About 9 years of this adventure, and it was very adventurous in the early days. It was very tricky, and so everything that I've personally learned as an individual, and we've got an amazing team of really incredible people from who've kind of come together to drive what we do over the line. We've learned what it's like. So I was also one of those people who turned up at a charger in the middle of nowhere that wasn't enough, it wasn't charging, or you didn't have the right membership card in your pocket, and it hasn't gone well. So all of that kind of learning and experience is what we've put into what we have today. And so that the base level is, you don't need any of that. It's a contactless card, or device, or Apple Pay, or whatever it might be, and it will start a charge. But we have got some really cool technology coming down the line, which is actually the next level beyond that, which is something called auto charge. So when we release an app, which will happen in the next few months, then people have the opportunity to remember their contactless details, basically, and so next time, and you then affiliate those with the vehicle. So next time you just turn up, you plug in the car, and it'll automatically start charging, and the app in your pocket will tell you how charged it is. So if you wanted to, leave in 15 minutes or whatever, you can say, hey, can you set my status and so on. So it should be really, really reliable, or will be really, really reliable. And it will just, again, go to reinforce that confidence. And we'll continue to develop features and so on, just to, because what we're aiming for isn't to remove the anxiety that you clearly have, as an example, about those long journeys, but it's to eliminate that entirely and replace that with the concept you wouldn't dream of taking your diesel car, because that's just like what a crazy thing to do when I've got this amazing electric thing, and it's just so much better, and I love these chargers, and it's just great. And and also we're bringing additional tools to help with journey planning, to minimize your amount that you need to charge at locations, and just to make it really awesome. And that's the plan.
Yeah, and I certainly hope our listeners have taken away, that point, which is the confidence to, go out and explore, as you've put it, and not be sort of fearful of, sort of going on a long journey and worrying about sort of running out of charge. And I think, that sort of confidence will undoubtedly assist the rollout of EVs. And I guess as more and more people buy into the whole sort of sustainability of EVs, it should hopefully get them thinking about, also, what they're doing within a home environment, within a work environment, in terms of reducing their energy consumption and making sure that they are using sustainable energy. So you mentioned sort of technology change, and I think, clearly for EV drivers, it's about the availability of chargers, it's about the speed of chargers, and obviously within EV cars themselves, it's the ability of the battery to take a faster charge and obviously hold hold a more significant charge. But in terms of technology changes, and I'm thinking now generally about sustainable energy, what's coming down the line that you think is going to be a bit of a game changer? What are you sort of looking forward to that you've got some insight about?
So I'm really looking forward to it. I think people will really get excited when they see the next generation of batteries that can basically take the level of power that the chargers that we put in can provide. That's coming really quickly. It's not this kind of concept of, oh, it'll come from somewhere. It's already there. There are companies already making this kit. There are companies, working out how to put it into the next kind of generations of vehicles, and it's already happening, to a level pretty quickly already. Cars, about, when was it, in 2014, we were delighted if we could get a 50 kilowatt charger, and now I'm putting in 350 kilowatts. That's 7 times the power. In fact, we're actually looking at our first 400 kilowatt chargers, and that's a sub 5-minute charge for 100 miles of charge. So I think that's going to make a huge difference. I think the other thing is that there's so many electric cars coming. They're great. Like in a few, just a few. I think the Tesla Model S was the one that made the difference, because I don't know if you remember, but before then, electric cars were considered a little bit boxy and a little bit geeky, and they weren't very cool. And then all of a sudden, there was this really cool car that just happened to be electric. And now there's loads and loads of them. And when you get one, I just think it makes people a bit more environmentally conscious anyway, because all of a sudden you're not polluting the air. What comes out the end of the exhaust pipe is pretty unpleasant, really, when you think about it. And you don't do that when you have an electric car. And if you can make energy from your home, which you'll start to think about, if you can, you're thinking, why am I buying energy from somebody else when I can make it myself? That makes you think more about that. And I think just generally it makes you think, well, maybe I should transition my energy supply to something that somebody that produces green energy. And so on and so forth. So I think there's lots of cool stuff. And I guess the bit where we're trying to come at it from is is how can we help people make this transition without any compromise, kind of the other way around, really, not because the government is saying that we have to, not just because the world's leading scientists are saying, look, if you guys don't, you will be the generation that didn't move the needle, and you're the last generation to ever have that opportunity, in terms of the opportunity we had today. But simply, all that's true, but how do we do it simply? Because we make it better, and to make it better, you can have really great locations to charge. So if someone wants to see an incredible way to charge the car, go and have a look at our electric forecourt in Essex, or another one we have in Norwich. We're building one at Gatwick Airport at the moment. We're about to build one in Stevenage as well. And as I mentioned, very keen to do electric forecourts in Bucks if anyone wants to come forward and suggest some locations. But that will really give people the confidence. Getting into an electric car, driving all these new models around will hopefully give people the desire. And we're investing in these super high power chargers today, so that when the next kind of generations of vehicles do turn up, then people will be able to charge them incredibly quickly. And that's also why it's a good idea to lease an electric car, we think, today. That's why we lease electric cars, because you don't need to worry about what is the should I get one now or should I get one in the future? Because because there's a lot of technology change.
Yeah.
Whereas if you lease an electric car, you don't worry about that. You hand the keys to the leasing company and you say, right, now I want one of these new ones that Toddington was talking about that's going to charge 200 kilowatts or plus of power, or maybe 350 by that point. So there's lots of cool stuff. That there really isn't. There really are very limited, I would say, downsides to this, and just for so many reasons, not least the protection of our, the single planet that we all call home. We really do need to get a move on and do this.
Brilliant, Toddington. So our time is just about up. I think actually I was going to ask you to make a few final points, but actually you've done it inadvertently. I think you've covered every topic that we had touched upon and given a fantastic concluding statement, really, a call for action, it sounded like. But is there anything else you want to say at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think I've just kind of echoed it enough. It just seems a bit too unbelievable. We've got so much going on in our work life. You know, we've got, you know, busy family life. There's all sorts of challenges in the economy. There's all sorts of other stuff, and you know, and these topics that I've been talking about just seemed a bit too big and a bit too scary, and they can't really be true, can they? And the inconvenient truth, and that's, you know, Al Gore, you know, got that title very right years ago when he talked about climate change. The inconvenient truth is it's happening. You know, you drive down the road these days, you don't get bugs in your windscreen, and you used to 20 years ago. You know, when we didn't get 40 degrees heat waves, and we are now. And unfortunately, I wish it wasn't true. I just wish it wasn't true, but unfortunately, it is. And it's been left to us to sort out. And we are fortunately at a point where there's no real disadvantages by sorting it out. There's just like loads of advantages. So to everyone out there who's listening, who's on the fence, go and get an electric car.
Yeah.
You know, it's the right thing to do, and it's an awesome thing to do. Transition to an electric, you know, a green energy supplier. Why not? It's a great thing to do. Put solar panels on your house. You'll definitely thank me for it, I'm sure. And you know, and let's just do our part. You know, future generations.
I think if you break down the barriers, so basically, as you say, you know, some of the topics are too big for some people to get their heads around. But if you break down the barriers and you make it easy for people, and I guess ultimately it's a bit of carrot and stick. You know, the carrot, you know, have a fantastic, you know, electric vehicle that, you know, I drive one and they're great fun to drive. I think you've got to give people, you know, you can't just frighten people into these things. That doesn't sadly work, but it is quite frightening nevertheless. But I think if you can break down the barriers, if you can make it easier for people, I think people are prepared to listen, aren't they? But you know, that there has to be a movement of people like yourself who lead by example, who give people the opportunity to do the right thing, and you know, more and more people, I think, will follow you. I'm sure they will. But
I think, Michael, I think future generations will judge us. You know, history will judge us, and they will say, when the world's leading scientists had told us unequivocally, humanity, this is your final chance, and you were in that driving seat, and you had the opportunity. You know, wouldn't it be awesome? Won't it be awesome to be able to look back and go, you know what? We're the ones that delivered. We're the ones that knocked it out of the park, and that is the opportunity that is available to us uniquely. So we really just need to seize it.
Yeah, Toddington, it's been a pleasure speaking with you. Thank you so much. I'm certain our listeners will find it fascinating. And thank you to those listeners for joining us today. Thank you very much.